Imagine a winter town where the wind seems to whisper old secrets across the snow, and every shadow looks like it might be carrying a prayer or a warning. Tonight, in the frozen silence of Frost Hollow, a 9-year-old girl trapped inside an abandoned truck tapped out the only signal she could, while a weary police officer and his aging German shepherd searched the storm for lives they feared were already lost. What happened next was not luck, but something far more powerful. Before we begin this journey of courage and quiet miracles, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. And if you love stories of hope and loyalty, please press subscribe to support the channel so we can continue bringing these winter tales to your screen. The winter afternoon in Frost Hollow looked as if someone had drawn a pale gray curtain over the entire world, and then shaken a bag of broken glass on top of it. Snow fell in heavy, uneven sheets, whipped sideways by mountain wind that had traveled for miles just to rattle through the bare pines and empty streets. On the edge of town, where the last houses gave way to a frozen stretch of highway and a strip of forgotten businesses, an abandoned parking lot lay half buried under drifts. In the far corner of that lot, a battered white pickup truck sat like a stranded animal, its windows crusted with ice, its metal body slowly disappearing under fresh snow. Inside the cargo bed of that truck, under a metal canopy that trapped every bit of cold but none of the light, a 9-year-old girl named Lila Harper was trying very hard not to think about what could happen if nobody found her. Lila was a small child, all narrow shoulders and thin wrists, with dark brown hair that usually fell in messy waves around her face, though now most of it was matted under a wool hat someone had yanked down too roughly over her ears. Her eyes were a deep hazel that turned almost golden when she laughed, but right now they were swollen from the kind of crying that doesn't make sound. Lila had the look of a kid who had learned to be quiet in rooms where adults shouted, the kind of child who listened more than she spoke, who read the air before she dared to move. At school, teachers said she was thoughtful and a little old for her age, which was a polite way of saying she asked questions that sometimes made adults uncomfortable, like why somebody didn't help when it was clear someone needed it. A year earlier, she had watched her parents' marriage crack open like ice on a river. There had been slammed doors and long, silent dinners, and then 2 apartments instead of 1. She had decided, secretly and fiercely, that if she ever saw someone in trouble, she would not look away. That promise pulsed somewhere deep under all the fear now, like a small coal under a mountain of snow. Her hands were pulled behind her back, bound with plastic zip ties that bit into the skin of her wrists. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. They had turned from burning pain to a frightening numbness that made her arms feel like they belonged to someone else. Her ankles were tied too, though more sloppily, as if the man who had taken her had been in a hurry, or thought the cold would do half his job for him. The man's name was Silas Crane, though Lila only knew him as the guy with the truck. He was in his late 30s with a heavy frame that carried more strength than care. His hair was the color of dirty snow, cut short but always a little unkempt, and his face had the worn look of someone who had spent most of his years outside and none of them at peace. There was something unfinished in his eyes, like a question asked too long ago and never answered. Silas wasn't a monster from a storybook. He was worse because he had once been ordinary. Years before, when the factory on the edge of Frost Hollow closed, he had lost not only his job, but the thin thread of identity that came with it. That winter, his younger brother had vanished, swallowed up by the same mix of bad company and bad choices that seemed to sit in the corners of every struggling town. No one had come looking hard enough, not in Silas's opinion. People moved on. The world kept turning. The town learned to forget. Silas never did. The bitterness didn't appear all at once. It grew slowly, like mold in a damp room, until it colored everything he saw. Somewhere along the way, his anger toward the world twisted into something darker, something that made him look at vulnerable faces and see targets instead of children. He had grabbed Lila that day with the same cold method he might have used to pick up a toolbox, something to be moved, used, stored. When he'd slammed the tailgate shut, he had told her in a low, flat voice that he was going to take a quick look at the roads, just to make sure the storm would cover his tracks. Then he had walked away into the white, leaving her alone with the sound of her own breathing and the relentless hiss of snow on metal. Lila had spent the first stretch of time trying not to panic. She had counted her breaths, recited multiplication tables, whispered the names of all the dogs she had ever watched in her favorite videos. She loved those videos, especially ones about police dogs, those calm, steady German shepherds with intelligent eyes and powerful bodies, working beside officers in uniforms that never seemed to bend in the wind. She liked the way the dogs moved with purpose, as if they understood that their job was to notice what humans missed. In some of those videos, the narrator had explained how sound and vibration traveled differently through metal, how a faint knock could carry farther than a shout in certain conditions. At the time, it had just been an interesting fact. Now, it felt like a rope thrown across a chasm. Her throat had turned to sandpaper in the cold. Screaming seemed useless. The storm outside swallowed sound like a giant, gentle hand pressing everything down. But her trapped feet were pressed against the metal wall of the truck. Metal could carry vibration. Vibration could carry a message. If someone out there was listening, if some dog like the ones she had watched, some Ranger or Rex or Shadow, was actually walking through that storm, maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. Lila pulled her knees up as far as the zip ties would allow and swung her heels back against the wall of the truck. The first kick was timid, just a dull thud that seemed to disappear in the vastness of the cold. The second was harder. The third was timed, more deliberate. 1, 2, 3. She tried to make a pattern, like the simple rhythms in the songs her mom used to put on in the kitchen on Sunday. Mornings. Her teeth chattered, but she kept going, tapping out her presence into a world she could not see. Not far away, on the edge of the Frost Hollow forest, Officer Damon Hale trudged through the deepening snow with a practiced gait that kept him steady even when the wind tried to shove him sideways. He was in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of strength that didn't need to prove itself in a mirror. His dark hair was clipped short. Faint stubble shadowed his jaw. Not out of style, but because search and rescue shifts didn't always respect razors and sleep. His eyes were a clear, steady gray, the color of river stones worn smooth by water. There was something quiet about Damon, an inwardness that made people think he was shy until they heard him give calm, precise orders in the middle of a crisis. He had grown up in Frost Hollow, the son of a mechanic and a waitress, and as a teenager, he had once joined the volunteers searching for a lost hiker in the mountains. The search had ended badly that time. They had found the man, but too late, and Damon had stood on the ridge watching the rescue crew carry the stretcher out, feeling a crack appear in his understanding of the world. From that day, he had decided that if he was ever in charge, he would do everything within human power to make sure too late was not the final chapter of someone's story. It was why he had chosen this particular branch of law enforcement, why he had specialized in K-9 search and rescue instead of chasing promotions that might have taken him behind a desk. On this bitter afternoon, Damon was supposed to be looking for a missing tourist couple who had strayed off a marked trail before the storm rolled in. The call had come in mid-morning, a worried relative from out of town, a rental car in the lot, footprints leading into the woods that the fresh snow was now erasing. Damon had assembled a small team and brought 4 K-9 units, knowing the dogs could discern scents and signatures humans would never notice. Beside him, padded Ranger, the oldest of the K-9s, a German shepherd whose black and tan coat had started to fade to gray around the muzzle. Ranger was 10 years old, nearly a veteran by K-9 standards, with deep amber eyes that held a kind of tired wisdom. He walked with the smooth confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times and still believed there was someone out there to save. In his younger years, Ranger had pulled a trapped teenager out from under a collapsed shed after an ice storm, had found an old rancher who'd fallen and broken his hip in a field no one thought to check, had stood between Damon and a charging suspect in a dark alley when a routine stop had turned into something much uglier. There was a faint scar under his left ear where a knife had grazed him. His fur grew uneven there, a rough little patch Damon stroked absent-mindedly whenever he was thinking too hard. Ranger had been scheduled to retire the previous year, but every time Damon filled out the paperwork, the old dog would outwork the younger ones on the next call-out, moving a step slower perhaps, but never losing focus. The compromise had become unspoken. Ranger would shift mostly to training and light duty, but when the weather turned bad and the calls got serious, Damon still reached for his leash. The rest of the K-9 team followed a few paces behind, Three younger dogs with bright eyes and restless energy, each paired with a handler bundled in the thick winter gear. Their shapes moved through the snow like shadows that had decided to grow legs. The wind whipped at Damon's face, stinging his cheeks and turning his breath into clouds that vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. He could feel the storm deepening, settling in for a long stay. He glanced at his GPS, checked their route, and was about to call a brief pause when he felt the leash in his hand go taut. Ranger had stopped, the dog's head tilted, ears pricked, body leaning slightly into the direction of the wind, as if something unseen had brushed against his senses. "Ranger," Damon murmured. "What is it, boy?" Ranger did not glance back. His entire frame seemed to narrow into focus. He shifted one step to the left, one to the right, testing the air, the snow beneath his paws, the faint tremor that had just threaded its way through the metal bones of the earth. Somewhere across the white distance, Lila's heels struck the truck wall again. 1, 2, 3. The vibration climbed into the metal frame, ran along bolts and beams, and spilled out into the frozen ground in a whisper too small for human skin to notice. But Ranger was not human. He lowered his nose, sniffed once, then twice, sneezed as ice crystals tickled his nostrils, and suddenly gave a short, decisive tug on the leash. The movement was not wild or panicked. It was that particular purposeful pull Damon knew very well, the signal that Ranger had picked up something important and was choosing a direction. Not the scent of the lost tourists they were meant to find, not the familiar trails of deer or fox or squirrel, something else, something small and frantic and very, very wrong. Damon hesitated for only a heartbeat, weighing protocol against the instinct he had honed after years of trusting this dog. Then he squeezed the leash and said simply, "All right, buddy, show me." Ranger surged forward, cutting a new path through the drifts, angling away from the tree line and toward the empty stretch of highway and the abandoned lot beyond. The other handlers saw the change and adjusted, their dogs falling into a loose, practiced formation behind the older shepherd. The radio at Damon's shoulder crackled faintly with static, the storm swallowing most of the signal, but he barely heard it. His focus narrowed to the dark shape at the end of the leash, and the invisible thread that seemed to pull them both towards something waiting out there in the white. Behind him, the forest loomed, silent and watching. Ahead, unseen in the swirling snow, a half-buried pickup truck sat like a secret, and a little girl kept tapping her heels against the wall, sending her small, stubborn rhythm into the world. A signal so fragile it could have been lost in a heartbeat, and yet just strong enough for the right ears and the right hearts to hear. The wind in Frost Hollow had a particular way of shifting when a storm deepened, an uneasy rising hum that pulsed across the empty plains like a warning. As Ranger pulled Damon forward, that hum settled into the spaces between the snow-covered pines, threading itself around the small search team, now veering off the expected route and into a territory no one had planned for. The missing tourists were supposed to be somewhere in the dense woodland behind them, not near the old highway where abandoned cars often slept under winter's weight. But Ranger did not care about expectations. A lifetime of searching had taught him that danger and desperation moved according to their own logic, often far outside human prediction. Snowflakes clung to Damon's lashes as he followed the old German shepherd, the leash taut in his gloved hand. Behind him, the younger K9s, Blitz, Rowan, and Scout, bounded through the drifts with restless energy, their handlers pushing hard to keep pace. Blitz, a stocky Belgian Malinois barely 3 years old, snorted each time snow hit his nose. Rowan, a long-limbed shepherd mix, navigated the terrain with the grace of a deer. Scout, the youngest, occasionally tried to leap at the snowflakes as if they were invitations to play. But each time one of them faltered in focus, the handlers barked quick, firm commands, bringing them back into formation. The storm thickened, swallowing sound with an almost deliberate hunger. Damon's boots sank deep into the snow with every step. The storm no longer felt like weather. It felt like a landscape shifting around them, closing in, condensing. Yet Ranger pressed on, unbothered by the cold burrowing into his joints. His ears remained angled forward, his breath steaming in steady bursts, his paws moving with methodical certainty. "Where are you taking us, old man?" Damon murmured, though affection softened his voice. "You'd better not be showing off." But Damon knew this wasn't showmanship. Ranger never wasted energy on theatrics. If he was directing them away from the original search area, it meant something was wrong, very wrong. Minutes stretched like long, slow threads. The abandoned parking lot emerged from the white swirl almost reluctantly, a faint outline at first, a flat gray expanse punctuated by snow drifts, and the ghostly silhouette of a single truck nearly buried beneath winter's grip. It looked lifeless. Dead metal. Dead air. A relic left behind. Ranger stopped so suddenly that Damon nearly collided with him. The dog's body stiffened, muscles rippling beneath his thick winter coat. His nose dropped toward the snow, and he inhaled deeply, his chest rising in a deliberate, practiced gesture. Then he moved toward the truck. No hesitation, no uncertainty, only purpose. Damon felt a prickling crawl up the back of his neck. Blitz and Rowan circled wide, instinctively forming a loose perimeter, as they had been trained to do whenever Ranger indicated. Something unusual. Scout stood frozen for a moment, his ears twitching before he followed Rowan's lead. Damon squinted at the truck through the falling snow. The canopy was frosted over, its seams sealed shut by layers of ice thick as glass. Nothing moved inside. No visible footprints surrounded it. The storm had erased everything at least an hour earlier. But Ranger placed both front paws against the side of the truck bed and pressed his nose to the metal. His body stilled for 3 heartbeats. Then he barked, once sharp, decisive. A signal Damon knew instantly. Live presence detected. A child, an adult, one person, more, he didn't know. But the bark meant one thing beyond doubt. Someone was still alive in that truck. Damon's training snapped into place. He raised his hand, signaling the rest of the team to hold position. "Blitz, Rowan, form containment pattern B," he ordered. The handlers guided the dogs into a crescent formation around the truck, noses pointed outward, ready to alert for approaching threats. "Scout, on standby with medical kit." Damon stepped forward, assessing the structure. The canopy was locked, but the lock was iced over, making it impossible to open without force. The sheen of frost traced jagged patterns across the metal, thick enough to suggest hours of freezing. Whoever was inside had been trapped through the worst of the storm. Damon reached for the specialized rescue knife clipped to his belt, a tool designed to cut through ice or synthetic restraints without risking injury to someone on the other side. His breath fogged against the cold metal as he leaned in, inspecting weak points. Ranger glanced up at him once, a soft whimper in his throat, a rare sound from the old shepherd, one Damon had only heard a handful of times throughout their years together. It meant urgency. It meant the margin for error was shrinking. "All right, buddy," Damon said. "Let's get them out." He chipped away at the ice in steady strokes, shards falling in little cascades of white. The metal beneath groaned as if awakening. "Anyone inside?" he called out. "This is Officer Damon Hale. If you can hear me, stay still. We're getting you out." No answer, not even a muffled sound. The lack of response pressed into Damon's ribs like a physical weight. He worked faster. When the final layer cracked free, he wedged the blade into the seam and pried. The handle shifted, resisted, then finally jerked upward with a rough, metallic squeal. The canopy's hatch opened. Cold air poured out like a trapped spirit seeking escape. And then he saw her, a small figure curled tight like a leaf caught in winter's fist, a wool hat pulled unevenly over tangled brown hair, skin drained of color, wrists bound behind her, ankles tied, lips pale and cracked, eyes wide, terrified, but alive. A little girl. "Hey," Damon whispered, voice softening as if he feared a louder tone would break her. "You're safe now. I've got you." The girl flinched, her breaths uneven. Damon recognized the early signs of hypothermia, sluggish blinking, delayed response, trembling, fading into stillness. "What's your name?" he asked gently. Her voice was barely air. "Lila." Ranger climbed halfway into the truck bed, moving slowly so as not to frighten her. He lowered his head and touched his cold nose to her knee. Lila's breath caught, not in fear, but relief. A tear carved a warm track down her cheek. Damon removed his gloves to work the bindings. His fingers numbed instantly in the cold, but he ignored the sting. He cut the plastic ties at her wrists, then her ankles, rubbing life back into her limbs as he spoke steady, soft words. "You're doing great, Lila. Stay with me. We're going to get you warmed up." Scout's handler brought the emergency blanket and insulated wrap. Damon lifted Lila gently, feeling how frighteningly light she was, how limp her arms hung, how the cold had seeped deep into her bones. Ranger stayed close, tail low, but wagging ever so slightly, a silent promise. As Damon carried her through the snow toward the ambulance, the little girl rested her forehead against his jacket. Her small voice trembled from cold and exhaustion. Did you hear me?" she whispered. "I was knocking." Damon glanced down at Ranger, who walked proudly at his side. "He did," Damon said. "He heard you when none of us could." Lila blinked slowly, tears gathering again. "I knew a dog would hear." Ranger gave a low, affectionate rumble, brushing his shoulder against Damon's leg. Back at the truck, the snow continued falling, covering over everything as if trying to erase the evidence of the nightmare Lila had endured. But the team had heard her signal. Ranger had heard her signal. And for the first time since Silas Crane had slammed the tailgate shut, hope had pierced the whiteout. The ambulance doors closed softly behind Lila as medics wrapped her in layers of thermal blankets, their movements quick and efficient despite the storm pressing against them from all sides. The glow of the interior lights painted her small face in tones of pale gold and trembling pink, a fragile warmth carved out of winter's iron grip. Damon stood outside for a moment, feeling the faint relief of knowing she was no longer trapped, no longer alone in the cold. But relief was only the beginning. A child in a locked truck meant someone had put her there. Someone planned to return or expected the storm to finish the work. And someone like that never traveled far. Ranger stood beside him, posture alert, breath steaming through the freezing air. The old shepherd didn't look toward the ambulance the way Scout and Blitz did. Instead, Ranger's focus remained on the tree line that bordered the lot, a black wall of frozen pines swaying under the weight of the storm. "You feel it too, don't you?" Damon murmured. Ranger didn't move. His ears were forward, eyes narrowed, body poised not in excitement, but in vigilance. Damon had seen that stance dozens of times. Right before Ranger detected movement no human could see. Damon turned to Lila's medic team. "Stay inside the ambulance until backup arrives," he instructed. "Keep her warm. Lock the doors." The lead medic nodded. "You think whoever did this is still close?" "I think we're not done yet," Damon answered. He didn't want to alarm Lila, but her eyes, half-lidded and fading toward exhaustion, tracked him until the door closed. It was as if some instinct told her the danger hadn't been wiped away with her rescue. Damon lifted a hand in reassurance through the glass, then turned toward the woods. Blitz's handler jogged up, pulling his collar tighter around his chin. "You want us to sweep the immediate perimeter?" "Yes," Damon said. "Pattern sweep C. Ranger and Kodiak are with me." Kodiak, the second oldest K9, a massive sable shepherd with a stern, almost knight-like bearing, trotted up, shaking snow from his heavy coat. He was younger than Ranger by 3 years, stronger in the back, faster in the sprint, but still carried a solemn discipline that made him a natural partner for high-risk tracking. All 4 dogs separated into formation, Blitz and Rowan widening the perimeter, Scout remaining near the ambulance, and Ranger and Kodiak flanking Damon as he moved into the trees. The forest breathed with a low, simmering quiet, thickened by falling snow and the eerie absence of natural sounds. No birds, no rustling, no distant crack of branches under deer hooves, just the soft, constant hiss of snow settling onto the world. They found the first clue within minutes. Ranger stopped abruptly, nose dipping to the ground. Damon kneeled beside him, brushing away the fresh snow. Footprints, human, large, deep-set. But that wasn't what made Damon's stomach clench. Another set of tracks led away, but these dragged in places, uneven, like someone had been pulling weight. That weight had a pattern too small and too chaotic to be adult footfalls. "Lila," Damon whispered. "He dragged her through here." Kodiak let out a low growl, not loud, but enough to send a ripple of tension through the group. His nostrils flared, inhaling scents Damon would never detect. Beside the footprints lay a plastic zip tie, half crushed, the same type used to bind Lila's wrists. Damon lifted it carefully with gloved fingers. "Dropped this when he loaded her," he muttered, "or when he fought to restrain her." A few feet ahead, something else caught Ranger's attention. He nudged his nose under a branch until a small object tumbled into view. A scrap of fabric, blue with a faded cartoon astronaut printed on it. A piece of a child's backpack. "That confirms it," Damon said quietly. "He moved her through here not long ago, maybe even before the storm thickened." He scanned the tree line, noting the developing pattern, footprints leading away from the truck, then looping back toward it, back toward Lila, back toward the evidence, back toward the one witness who could speak. Damon's breath tightened in his chest. "He came back," he said aloud. "He's coming back to where he left her." Ranger emitted a short, tense bark. Kodiak shifted position, angling himself between Damon and the direction the tracks led, protective but prepared. Damon spoke into his radio, though the static nearly drowned him out. "Team, the suspect may be returning to the truck location. Maintain positions. Assume hostile intent." A crackle of acknowledgement came through, distorted but clear enough. The wind sharpened suddenly, slicing through the silence like a blade. Snow shook loose from branches overhead. Even the air changed, carrying the faintest tremor of something mechanical, something foreign to the forest. Ranger's head whipped toward the sound, not scent, not movement, vibration. A low, grumbling murmur filtered through the storm, distant but unmistakable. An engine. Damon froze. His fingers curled instinctively toward his holster. "No," he whispered. "Not now, not yet." The engine grew closer, pushing through the white wall of snowfall, like a predator creeping out of fog. Kodiak's hackles rose. Blitz barked once from the perimeter. Rowan followed with a sharp, alert cry. The forest wasn't quiet anymore. It was waking. Damon pressed his back against a pine trunk, peering toward the road. Through the storm, a pair of headlights began to flicker into existence, dull shapes at first, then sharper points carving through the whiteout. Ranger stepped forward, planting himself firmly in front of Damon, muscles coiled. There was no doubt. Silas Crane was coming back, and he was coming fast. The vehicle's growl deepened as it shifted. Gears. Snow sprayed in plumes around its tires. The beams swayed left, then right, hunting through the storm. Damon raised his hand toward the dogs. "Hold," he breathed. "Hold." Ranger didn't twitch. Kodiak stood like a stone sentinel. The engine roared again, closer, louder. Then the headlights cut across the trees, sweeping a harsh arc of light through the clearing. The K9s braced. Damon braced. The storm itself seemed to hold its breath. And just before the vehicle burst into full view, the headlights cut through the trees like two pale, trembling moons, their beams warping against the swirling snow. Damon steadied his breath as the vehicle barreled through the whiteout, sliding slightly as it fought for traction on the ice-packed road. Ranger and Kodiak stood shoulder to shoulder in front of him, their bodies frozen in tense silhouettes, each muscle tuned toward the approaching threat. The SUV burst into view, an older model with mismatched doors and a front bumper dented from too many winters spent navigating rural roads. Snow clung thick to the wheel wells, caking the sides like armor. The engine roared as the vehicle skidded into the lot, braking too hard, fishtailing, before finally jerking to a stop near the abandoned truck where Lila had been found. The driver's door slammed open. Silas Crane stepped into the storm. He moved like someone who didn't feel cold anymore, not because he was immune to it, but because something inside him had frozen long before the winter ever arrived. Snow clung to his beard in icy clumps, and the chill reddened his cheeks into harsh patches. His shoulders were broad beneath a heavy work jacket, the kind worn by men who lifted things for a living, or by men who needed to look as if they could. But the most startling thing about Silas wasn't his size. It was his eyes. They were frantic, unblinking against the wind, scanning the truck bed, scanning the snow, scanning the space where he expected a captive child to be. His gaze held the wildness of someone who had built a warped purpose out of his own grief, and now saw that purpose slipping away. He did not notice Damon at first, nor the dogs, nor the circle of disturbed snow around the truck that marked the rescue. His entire attention funneled toward the empty cargo bed. "No," Silas muttered, voice ragged. "No, no, no." He stomped toward the pickup, yanking open the canopy that Damon had already cracked, peering inside as if refusing to believe the emptiness with his own eyes. He spun around then and saw Damon. Damon remained still, one hand open at his side in a non-threatening posture, the other hovering near his holster. "Silas Crane," Damon called out, his voice firm enough to cut through wind. "Step away from the truck. You're done. The girl is safe." Silas's breath came out in a harsh white plume. His gaze darted toward the ambulance lights glowing faintly through the storm, recognition snapping into place like a trap springing shut. "You took her," he spat. "You think you can just walk in and—" "I didn't take anything," Damon interrupted. "I rescued her. She was freezing. She could have died in there." Silas laughed, a broken, jagged sound that didn't belong in the human throat. His shoulders trembled, not from cold, but from the violent churn beneath his ribs. "You don't understand," he growled. "It's not just her. She wasn't the only one. You think you saved her? You have no idea what's coming." His words were a confession without context, a clue wrapped in madness. Damon registered the implications, storing the information for the moment he could actually use it. "You need to step away," Damon ordered again. "Hands where I can see them." Silas took one slow step back from the truck, but it was not surrender. He was aligning himself, preparing. The storm shifted, as if the wind itself sensed the pivot in the air. Ranger's ears flattened. Kodiak's chest rumbled with a deep, vibrating growl. Then Silas lunged, not at Damon, not at the dogs. He sprinted toward the ambulance, the only place Lila could be. Damon reacted instinctively. "Ranger! Kodiak!" The world moved in fragments. Silas's boots tore through the snow, kicking up white plumes behind him. His breath heaved in ragged bursts. His hands were empty, but Damon saw the tension in his shoulders. He was ready to grab, strike, drag, anything to finish what he had started. The medic inside the ambulance saw the movement too. The doors slammed shut. The interior lights flickered as silhouettes scrambled in alarm. Ranger launched first, old age forgotten in the urgency of instinct. His paws churned the snow in rhythmic, powerful strokes, body angled low like a wolf slicing through a storm. Kodiak surged beside him, bigger and faster, his tail stiff, his gaze locked onto Silas's shoulder blades, the perfect intercept point. "Stop!" Damon yelled, running after them, but he knew he wouldn't reach Silas in time. The K9s were the only line left between the child and the man who meant to reclaim her. Silas glanced behind him, saw the charging dogs, and pivoted sharply, snow spraying into the air as he angled his body toward the ambulance's side panel. He reached for the handle. He yanked, locked. He growled, slamming his shoulder into the door. The metal rattled under the impact. Inside, Lila screamed. That sound, thin, terrified, muffled through layers of steel, stabbed through the roar of the wind. It fueled Ranger. He closed the distance with a guttural snarl that Damon had heard only during the rarest, most dangerous calls. Soundless fury sharpened into purpose. Silas turned too late. Ranger lunged, jaws snapping around the sleeve of Silas's jacket, teeth locking onto thick fabric instead of flesh, exactly as he had been trained. He twisted, using his weight to pull Silas off balance. Kodiak hit next, a muscular, unstoppable force slamming into Silas's hip, knocking him sideways, driving him away from the ambulance door. Snow exploded beneath them, the impact sending all three sprawling. Silas roared, thrashing under the weight of two disciplined K9s. His hands scrambled through the snow as he fought to dislodge Ranger's grip. "Hold!" Damon commanded from behind, sprinting across the lot. But the storm turned the moment into chaos. The wind howled, snow blinded. Silas twisted violently, wrenching one arm free. Ranger tightened his hold. Kodiak repositioned for the next maneuver. The ambulance lights flickered again, casting long shadows across the struggle. Damon pushed harder, boots sliding. Silas reached into his coat, and before Damon could discern what he was grabbing, for a moment, the world narrowed into three colors: white from the storm, black from the trees, and the raw, pulsing red of danger. Damon felt those colors collide in his chest as Silas's hand shot into his coat. One desperate, reckless movement that could mean anything. "Ranger, off target, wrist only," Damon shouted, voice slicing through the wind. Ranger responded instantly. The old shepherd released Silas's sleeve, repositioned with the fluid precision of years of disciplined training, and launched upward, not to maul, not to injure, but to do exactly what he had been taught in countless practice drills. Neutralize the hand before the weapon clears the coat. His teeth clamped onto Silas's wrist, not flesh, not bone, just the padded fabric of the jacket, a perfect controlled hold. Silas's fingers spasmed open in shock, and the object he had been reaching for fell harmlessly into the snow with a dull thud. A metal tool, maybe a screwdriver or pry bar, instantly swallowed by the drifting white. Kodiak arrived a heartbeat later. The younger shepherd's growl rolled low and steady as he circled swiftly to cut off Silas's escape path. He stood solidly behind Silas, a wall of muscle and instinct, controlling the suspect's movements without ever touching him. Pure, textbook K9 containment. Silas tried to twist away, but Ranger adjusted his grip, firm yet measured. The old dog's paws dug into the snow, anchoring himself. His body curved slightly to avoid any wild kicks or swings. His tail was down, his stance wide. Every part of him spoke the silent language of a trained guardian. "You will not move unless my handler says you can." Damon closed the last few feet in a sprint, snow exploding beneath his boots. He had rehearsed this process 1,000 times, not only in the academy, but on real calls, in real storms, with real people whose fear or fury pushed them to the edge. A proper takedown wasn't about force, it was about timing, angles, and restraint. "Ranger, hold!" he called again, and Ranger shifted only enough to keep Silas off balance. Damon seized Silas's free arm, pivoted his hips, and used the momentum, not brute strength, to turn the man down into the snow. Silas crashed onto his side, the breath knocked from him. Damon kept one knee planted beside his ribs, not on them, minimizing pressure while maximizing control. "Stay down," Damon commanded. Silas bucked once, twice, but Kodiak stepped forward with a single warning bark, a deep, commanding sound that froze the last struggle out of Silas's muscles. Damon moved fast, efficient, almost surgical. Left wrist, grip, twist, right wrist, align, lock. Handcuffs clicked into place, a clean, unmistakable sound that cut through the storm like the final word in a long, violent sentence. The entire restraint, from first contact to cuffs closing, took 14 seconds. Damon had counted. He always counted. Silas lay breathing hard, face pressed against the snow. Anger flared back into his eyes, but exhaustion dulled the edges. His voice was hoarse when he rasped, "You don't know what you're stopping. You don't know what they were doing." Damon didn't rise to it. "You're done, Silas. Whatever story you're trying to tell can wait until backup arrives." Silas twisted his head just enough to glare at the ambulance. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Ranger stepped closer, not aggressive, but unyielding. Damon placed a reassuring gloved hand on the dog's neck. "It ends here," Damon said. Behind them, the ambulance door cracked open. One of the medics peeked out cautiously. "Is it safe?" she asked. "For now," Damon replied. "Keep the girl inside. We'll have him transported the moment backup reaches us." But the question echoed more deeply for Lila. She had pressed her forehead to the frosty window during the struggle, watching those blurred shapes, her rescuer, 2 dogs, a man who had frightened her in ways she did not yet understand. She'd curled her fingers around the blanket edge so tightly that her knuckles paled. When Silas lunged at the door, she had seen his face, twisted by desperation, and she had seen Ranger leap for her, protecting her with a fierceness no human could have anticipated. Now, from inside the ambulance, she saw Damon kneel beside Ranger, speaking quietly while Kodiak maintained his vigilant perimeter. And something in her chest that had been locked tight since the moment of her abduction loosened, just a fraction, but enough to breathe again. Damon rose, lifting the radio to his lips. "Dispatch, this is Hale. Suspect Silas Crane detained and in custody. Request immediate transport and a secondary unit for evidence recovery. Also send a child services representative. Victim located alive, hypothermic, but stable. Static crackled. A distorted voice came through. Copy, Officer Hale. ETA 10 minutes. Damon exhaled, watching the air shiver out in a long plume. The storm wasn't letting up, but at least it no longer felt like the enemy. He turned to Ranger and Kodiak. Both dogs sat now, alert but calmer. Kodiak kept his eyes trained on Silas, breath steady. Ranger, though older and wearier, kept his tail resting lightly on the snow, chest rising with slow discipline. Good work, Damon murmured, scratching behind Ranger's ear. Textbook. Ranger leaned into the touch just slightly. Old dogs didn't show pride with exuberance, but with quiet satisfaction. Kodiak allowed himself a small huff, as if reminding Damon that he had played his part too. Damon chuckled. You both did. I'll put it in my report. The medic opened the ambulance door again, more confidently this time. She's asking for you, she said. The girl, Lila. Damon nodded, glancing at Silas once more to ensure he stayed down. Kodiak remained beside the restrained man as a living. Barrier, posture professional, eyes steady. Ranger trotted beside Damon toward the ambulance, his paws leaving soft prints in the fresh snow. When they reached the open door, Lila was sitting upright, wrapped in thick blankets, cheeks flushed from the heater's warmth. Her eyes, hazel and full of a bravery that had survived the cold, lifted immediately to Ranger. He stepped forward, placing his head gently against her knees. Lila's hands trembled as she stroked his fur, but her voice, though faint, held a steadiness beyond her years. You saved me, she whispered. Ranger gave a soft rumble, more of a warm exhale than a sound. His eyes half closed as if to say you called, and I answered. Damon rested a hand against the ambulance doorframe. He heard your signal when none of us could, he said. Your knocking gave us something to follow. You did everything right. Lila blinked, drops of warmth forming in the corners of her eyes. I wasn't sure anyone could hear through the storm. Damon shook his head gently. Storms don't stop everything. Not hope, not instinct. Sometimes all it takes is one small sound in the right direction. Behind them, the falling snow softened, burying Silas's footprints, burying the struggle, burying the remnants of fear. But the prints left by Ranger and Kodiak remained clearer, two paths carved by loyalty and purpose. Damon gave Lila a reassuring smile. You're safe now, truly safe. And for the first time since the nightmare began, Lila believed him. By the time the convoy rolled away from the abandoned lot, the storm had shifted into something gentler. The fierce, slicing wind that had threatened to wipe the world clean of color softened into a steady hush, as if winter itself were growing tired. Snow settled in quieter patterns, drifting instead of slashing, floating instead of attacking. The road to Frost Hollow Medical Center cut through a series of winding turns, each bend revealing silhouettes of dark pine trees bowed beneath their new coats of white. Inside the ambulance, wrapped in thermal blankets and warmed by circulating heat, Lila Harper lay propped slightly upright on the stretcher. Her cheeks had regained a faint flush, not just from the heater, but from the presence of Ranger, who occupied the narrow floor space beside her. The old German shepherd was too large for the cramped environment, yet somehow he fit as if shaped by the space itself. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths. His tail rested lightly along the metal floor. Even with the ambulance's interior shaking occasionally over icy patches, Ranger remained unbothered, anchored by the simple fact that Lila was no longer alone. One of the medics cast a glance toward them and whispered to her colleague, I've never seen a K9 take to a kid like that. He's not even her assigned dog. He's assigned to the moment, the other medic replied softly. Some dogs know who needs them. When the ambulance pulled into the circular entrance of Frost Hollow Medical Center, a small but well-equipped hospital that served the town and all surrounding mountain communities, Damon was already there. He had followed in his patrol vehicle with Kodiak, sitting upright in the back crate, the younger shepherd's gaze sharp, protective, scanning everyone who moved. Damon stepped forward as the ambulance doors opened. The warm light spilling out through the hospital's glass entrance made the world feel less merciless. Nurses hurried out with equipment. A doctor, Dr. Myers, A steady woman in her 50s with frost on her hair and years of compassion etched in the corners of her eyes, was already asking for Lila's vitals. She looked at Damon. Hypothermia, moderate stage, but she's young. Kids bounce back better than adults, thank God. Damon nodded. She was in that truck for hours. The storm did everything it could to hide her. And the dog did everything he could to find her, Dr. Myers said, glancing down at Ranger with a grateful smile. Lila reached out a hand from beneath the pile of blankets. Ranger, he can come in, right? Might as well let him, Dr. Myers said. After what he did, I'd trust him to monitor my own heartbeat. Ranger followed the stretcher into the hospital with slow, careful steps, as if aware that clean floors and sharp smells required different manners than a snowy forest. His ears stayed perked, his nose twitched as he sifted through the hallway scents, medication, antiseptic, winter jackets still steaming from the cold. Damon walked next to Lila's stretcher, his boots tapping against the linoleum. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, humming in rhythm with the heating vents. He felt the weight of the evening pressing against his shoulders, the adrenaline gone now, leaving only the dense reality of what had nearly happened. As they reached the pediatric recovery room, Ranger hopped onto a padded bench near the bed, curling his body in a half circle. Lila reached toward him immediately, placing her hand on his fur. Ranger lowered his head into her palm, closing his eyes as if accepting a quiet truth. He belonged here, at least for this moment. A nurse hooked up warm IV fluids. Another brought hot packs wrapped in towels. Dr. Myers examined Lila's fingers, checking for frostbite. Through it all, Lila kept her hand on Ranger, grounding herself. Damon remained nearby, leaning lightly against the doorframe. He didn't want to intrude, but he wanted her to know he was still there. When she finally looked up at him, her eyes carrying more exhaustion than fear now, he smiled. "You're doing well," he said. "You're safe. That's the most important part." She swallowed before speaking. Is Silas gone?" Damon nodded softly. "He's in custody. Officers are transporting him now. He can't come near you." Lila looked toward Ranger. "He kept me warm. He kept me here." Ranger thumped his tail once, very lightly. Minutes passed, the tension drained from the room in small, careful increments. Damon stepped out briefly to handle the last pieces of procedure, radioing dispatch, confirming the suspect's transport, requesting a detective and child services officer for the coming investigation in the morning. When he returned, Ranger lifted his head. Lila was waiting for him, with a folded piece of paper in her hands. "I wrote something," she said. Her voice was quiet but less shaky. "For you? For Ranger?" Damon approached, accepting the paper with gentle hands. Inside, written with the uneven script of a child whose fingers were still warming, were the words, "Tell Ranger that I think he is a miracle that got lost and found his way back to me." Something tightened behind Damon's ribs, a feeling equal parts ache and warmth. There were nights in this job that carved people hollow, nights that didn't end with a child alive, a dog triumphant, or a storm forgiving. Tonight might have gone that way, but it hadn't, and that mattered. Ranger nudged Lila's hand again, as if asking whether she needed more warmth, or simply reminding her he wasn't going anywhere until she slept. Kodiak, who had been waiting with his handler at the door, came closer, sniffing the air, then sitting proudly as if the part of the guardianship circle. "You know," Damon said, his voice quiet, "he's helped a lot of people in this town. He's found hikers, protected officers, saved a kid from an ice shed collapse years ago. But I think tonight, he found someone he was meant to find." Lila blinked slowly, then let her eyes drift toward Ranger. "I heard a teacher say once that some miracles hide. They're small. They look like regular things. But when you need them, they show up." "And do you think Ranger showed up?" Damon asked. "I think he heard me when nobody else could." Ranger lifted his head proudly. Dr. Myers looked into the room once more. "She'll need rest, but she's stable, and if that dog is staying, he better keep quiet when she sleeps." "He will," Damon promised. Ranger huffed once, as if signaling agreement. Outside the hospital windows, the storm had nearly stopped. Snow still fell, but softly now, gentler flakes drifting like feathers, settling onto the streets of Frost Hollow in a blanket that looked less hostile and more like forgiveness. House lights twinkled through the haze, smoke curled from chimneys, rising into the pale winter sky. Frost Hollow had always been a cold place, geographically, seasonally. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the warmth of the hospital lights, maybe the steady breath of an old dog who refused to retire, or maybe the way a rescued child smiled at the man who saved her, or maybe it was what Lila had written, a lost miracle, found again. Damon set the note carefully on the bedside table. "Sleep, Lila. Tomorrow's a new day." She nodded slowly, her eyes closed. Ranger stayed where he was, his head resting near her blankets, guarding her dreams. And in the quiet, Damon felt something thaw inside him as well. A reminder that even in winter's harshest moments, sometimes the smallest signals, the faintest knocks, could rewrite an entire night. Frost Hollow had not lost its cold, but somehow it no longer felt as cold as before. In the quiet ending of this winter journey, we are reminded that the miracles of God do not always arrive with thunder or shining signs. Sometimes they come through the steady heartbeat of a loyal dog who refuses to give up. Sometimes they come through a brave child who keeps knocking even when the world seems too cold to listen. And sometimes they come through the quiet strength God places in ordinary people like Officer Damon, who choose to do the right thing even when no one is watching. In our own lives, we all face storms, moments when we feel lost or unseen or unsure if anyone can hear our small cry for help. But God walks beside us even then, guiding our steps and sending comfort in ways we may not expect. A kind word, a helping hand, a moment of courage. These are the gentle miracles He uses to warm our cold days. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today, and leave a comment to tell us your thoughts. Type Amen if you believe that God still sends quiet miracles into our lives. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, protection, and strength in every season. And please press subscribe to support the channel so we can continue bringing stories of faith, kindness, and redemption to many hearts.